the bourgeoisie simply wants to not only expand capital, but also expand the size of their houses in order to replicate the feudal lords that they overthrew in the previous epoch. That's why he calls it his castle. That's why Kellie called it his castle, you see, because in essence, the bourgeoisie did not overthrow feudalism because they wanted to liberate the peasant or liberate the worker. They overthrew feudalism because they wanted to supplant the feudalists and make themselves the new kings of society. Good afternoon from the northern Malaysian state of Perak. I hope you're having an amazing day, because if you're having an amazing day, I'm having an amazing day. If I'm having an amazing day, you should be having an amazing day. Today, I'm standing in front of Kellie's castle, which is an abandoned mansion that's almost a century old, that was built by the Scottish planter William Kellie Smith. Located approximately 30 kilometers away from the town of Ipoh, this mansion is a 20th century colonial building that was abandoned halfway through construction due to the fact that the owner, William Kellie, passed away suddenly of pneumonia at the tender age of just 56 when he was in Portugal trying to acquire a lift for his mansion. And basically what happened was the place has been totally desolate ever since. It's now become a tourist attraction where people from all over the world come in order to take a look at this grand, unfinished architectural marvel. It's about 3 stories high, if I'm not mistaken, and it boasts a variety of materials from all over the world. It's a fascinating place to visit. You know, an interesting thing about the layout of this castle, if you want to call it that, is that cement was not yet available in Malaya during the early 20th century. So it was really a combination of duck egg, sand, chalk, brown sugar, and honey that held these bricks together. Well, this is the Kellie family prayer room with their family altar that is around 100 years old. And those bricks that are behind the altar were produced by people from Madras using a specific technique. And as you can see, the design of the castle, I keep calling it a castle, but it's really a mansion, is really inspired by a variety of factors, but you'll notice the clear Mughal architecture in its design. Till today, no one's really sure why William Kellie built this mansion. There are some who say he built it for his wife, while others say that he built it for his son to live in someday. We'll never know, but one thing we'll know for certain is that upon his death, the construction of this incomplete mansion was halted, simply because, well, the company considered it a waste of money to continue building, and also Agnes, his wife, sold her shares off. And so she went back to England with their son, and Kellie's son and his wife lived in England for the rest of their lives. And his son was killed in action during the Second World War as a fighter pilot. But today's video is not really about the evils of colonization, no. It is merely to illustrate how wasteful and unproductive and inefficient the allocation of resources under the capitalist mode of production really is. I don't think I need to inform you at this point that the capitalist mode of production is driven by the expansion of capital or private property, by which I don't only mean money, but things which generate profit. So this house, for example, if it were given to Kellie's son or his wife to be used as their dwelling place, would not be counted as private property, but rather as personal property. You see, there's this belief that people harbor, an erroneous belief that socialists want to seize your house, your car, your toothbrush, and that's just gross. I don't want to use your toothbrush, and distribute it, or redistribute it rather, for the good of the B40s, the bottom 40s, the poorest of society. I mean, there's a grain of truth in that regard, in the sense that, yes, socialism is about creating a more equitable society where there are, not such wide disparities between the rich and the poor. But aside from that, one thing that people never talk about is that under socialism, we also want to allocate resources more efficiently. Do you think, for example, this is an efficient allocation of resources? It is a totally and utterly inefficient allocation of resources and a waste of labor power. Now, of course, it has been relegated to state property under the bourgeois state, and is now the property of the Ipoh government. But the fact of the matter is that when Kellie's mansion was abandoned, it was undwelled. It became uninhabited for decades, almost a century. If you were a homeless person and you tried to take up residence in this place, why, you'd be accused of trespassing on private property, even though the owner has long since passed away. The obvious question we ought to be asking is, of course, why is it that Kellie's son gets a mansion for himself because his father is a capitalist, while the workers who built this mansion are alienated from the wealth that they produce? What I mean to say is that the workers who built this very mansion lived in hovels, while the very people they were building it for would get to live in it simply by virtue of being born to a capitalist family. So it's like, that is another question we have to address under socialism, because the idea is that, why is it that certain people, if society is supposed to be fair and meritocratic, are entitled to inherit private property? Or, let me rephrase that, certain people are basically born with the passing down of wealth, while others basically have nothing and yet have to sell their labor power to these people in order to survive. That is the capitalist mode of production. Now, this was Kellie's reading room, and it was designed to be the room where he'd do his studies. And this room is supposed to be haunted. While Kellie's mansion is one of the most iconic abandoned houses, there are thousands, perhaps millions of such cases in which their owners have passed on without a next of kin, or perhaps their owners have passed on without a will, and so they have been left to fester, just like that. But that, in my opinion, in my socialistic opinion, is an absolute waste of resources. Because under a socialist state, this mansion would have been converted into cheap, affordable public housing. In the Soviet Union, for example, there were homeless people. Okay, socialism is not utopia where, there's a perfect society. But I can tell you that under a socialist society, resources will not be wasted in this manner, in that if it serves no use value for the good of the community, it gets allocated for the good of the community. If there is no one living in a particular house, it will be turned into public housing. If there's no one using an abandoned car, it will become the people's car. The idea of private property is this liberal idea of the inalienable right that you and your family are entitled exclusive rights to something under any conditions. Yeah, part of the reason why liberals and socialists are hostile to each other is because while there may be overlaps in their ideologies, for example, they both believe in social justice, liberals to a certain extent at least, as long as it doesn't infringe on their private property or it doesn't infringe on their family's capital. Well, the main split between liberal and socialist is that liberals believe that if you have accumulated something, or rather I should say that if you own something, it is yours even after you die, even if you have no next of kin. And there's no one has a right to take that away from you. While socialists, on the other hand, believe that if you have passed on, if you have no next of kin, and, if you have not left any clear instructions about what to do with your stuff, well, that stuff becomes state property, and that stuff becomes allocated for the good of the community, namely the poor, you see. So that seems to be the dividing line between liberals and socialists. Liberals believe in the absolute right to private property. That is to say that when you own something, it cannot simply be used as personal, or rather, I should rephrase myself. When you own something, that thing is yours, no matter which circumstances under which you own it, whether you live in it or rent it out or use it as a shop. It's up to you. While socialists, on the other hand, do not agree with that. If something is not personal property, it becomes state property. It should become state property under the socialist state, not the bourgeois state. And it should be used for the good of the vulnerable members of the community. In a socialist society, this mansion would have already been turned into public housing. So I guess the dividing line between liberals and socialists is that liberals believe that my stuff is my stuff and no one has a right to touch it. While socialists, on the other hand, believe that your stuff is only your stuff insofar as you're using it. But if you're not using it, if it doesn't serve a use value, or I should say that if it is not personal property, it should be the property of the community. Because, what's the point in having thousands or millions of uninhabited houses if no one's going to live in them? Isn't a house supposed to be lived in the first place? Considering there are millions of homeless people in the world and millions of vacant, perhaps even abandoned houses in the world, is not the most logical use of these resources to house these homeless people. But you can't have that under capitalism, can you? You can't have that under the capitalist mode of production, because that would be an infringement on private property, would it not? Even though it's the private property of a dead man who could not care less about what's being done with it. We socialists do not promise miracles. We do not promise that we have the answers to all of life's questions. And we certainly do not promise to solve the homeless situation overnight. But I would say that the socialist mode of production has a much more efficient application of resources than the capitalist mode of production. Because when a capitalist dies, well, if he does not leave any clear instructions what to do with his private property, well, his private property dies with him. And you cannot take your private property to the grave. The same goes for your personal property. If your personal property is not being used by you, then I see no reason why it should not be used by someone else who might need it more than you do. That seems perfectly logical, but not to the liberal mind, because the liberal mind is so saturated in individualism that it cannot envision a society where things do not exist simply to be owned by individual people, but things should be owned by the community at large. If it were up to me, and it's obviously not up to me, but if it were up to me, if I were the dictator of Malaysia, I would finish up this mansion. I would finish it up, refurbish it, and use it for the good of the public. Because what good is the production of things that serve no use for the community? What good is a mansion if there are homeless people out there who can't even find a flat to live in? What good is an abandoned mansion? A tourist attraction? I say that under the socialist mode of production, we will allocate resources more efficiently, and we will not engage in such wasteful projects. And if anything gets abandoned, well, it will become state property, and the state, the socialist state, will decide. The people will decide what to do with it. You can't take your property to the grave. You can't take your money, you can't take your houses, you can't take your luxuries to the grave. And to be frank, there's no reason at all why anyone should aspire to live in a mansion. Why? Because it's big? What good does living in a mansion really do? Nothing, really. One could be happy living in a regular house, but, you know, the bourgeoisie simply wants to not only expand capital, but also expand the size of their houses in order to replicate the feudal lords that they overthrew in the previous epoch. That's why he calls it his castle. That's why Kellie called it his castle, you see, because in essence, the bourgeoisie did not overthrow feudalism because they wanted to liberate the peasant or liberate the worker. They overthrew feudalism because they wanted to supplant the feudalists and make themselves the new kings of society. And they passed down their lineage, or they passed down their privileges not through the passing down of titles or land, but rather by the passing down of capital. And so, capitalist society is the final nail in the coffin of class society. It will die, just like Kellie's mansion will die over time, and be reborn as something that is used for the good of the collective. The bourgeoisie have simply simplified class antagonisms and broken society down into two hostile camps. We have reached the final stage of class society when the proletariat or the working class plays their historical role of overthrowing the bourgeoisie in the very same weapon the bourgeoisie overthrew the feudalists. But they will not replace the bourgeoisie as an oppressive class, no. They will abolish class society altogether, and the state will wither away. I can't wait for that day. Thank you very much, and if you enjoy my content, please subscribe to my channel. I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.